John, welcome
Scott.
back. Or should I
Should
say,
say welcome back to you.
yeah, welcome back to me. What's going on here? But all I know is that we have the coolest hats in the
We
U.S.
do. Yeah, merch, right? New merch from Steph Nation.
Everyone,
Yeah,
take notice. Take notice. These are only one of one right now.
that's
Um,
right.
there it is. Look at the
Yeah.
close up there. And we've been just for the past half hour, I've been trying to work out our filters. I'm very curious to see. I've discovered this touch up feature, and basically saying is like, you got wrinkles, you got freckles, zits, whatever. If you scroll all the way to the right, somehow you can't see all the pop marks and
Yeah,
just
and somehow the AI in my computer just like
yeah,
kicked back a sign. Said, sorry, this is as
yeah,
good as it gets, champ. That's all it
yeah,
goes.
yeah. You're gonna need a booster somehow. It only goes so far. It only goes to 11. So everyone bear with us. We
This is it.
like those people on Instagram, what we can also use filters, right? So we'll just hope you never see us live and go, man, that dude's face is jacked. Um, Tonight we are talking about cult movies. And John and I have been, well, we've been kind of, I won't say dancing around this issue, but it's a very complex topic. And for many people, what constitutes a cult movie, purists would say, no, it's not a cult movie. And some people say it is and say it isn't. And so there's a lot of, I don't know, banter or just opinions going back and forth. So it's our night to settle the score, to go, hey,
Mhm.
this is what we believe is a cult movie. And we want your opinions, and we want to hear, are we full of BS and whatnot? But let me hand it over to you, John. When I say cult movie, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think you talked. I think you described it pretty well. It's a very complex topic, and like the people who, are film professionals, people that spend their lives in talking about movies, whether you're a student, a professor, or whatever you do. I think you can go really deep into what technically is a cult film. When I think about cult films, I think it really, there's like two categories. There's one category that's really that avant-garde film that is so bizarre and kind of odd, usually low production value, low distribution,
Mhm.
and just kind of gets a cult following to it. People that a small group or a mid-sized group of people attach themselves to it, and it's almost, they it's almost like their favorite like hockey or baseball team. They just sort of follow it and promote it, and they love it and they talk about it. There's that kind of cult film, which is probably more towards like what the purists would say a cult film is. And then there's a cult film in my world, which is those small films that are usually low production value, don't have a lot of famous actors in it, small distribution. You don't really hear about them, but they come out and you just find yourself, just in love with the film. And sure enough, it begins to build momentum. And then pretty
Yeah.
soon there's this wave of fandom behind it. And in some cases that can go mainstream and they become like, they become very popular and go full on, or they just kind of remain sort of like this really popular film that just does really well in the aftermarket, like after it comes out of theaters, and
Yeah.
they replay it in theaters. So that's kind of how I define those two categories of cult film. But again, I'm not a professional film historian by any
Well,
stretch. So,
and we're definitely not a professional video cast
no,
here on film,
no,
and we never aspired to be one.
no.
And we would be essentially a cult video cast
It's
by
deep,
definition.
deep, deep cult
we,
video cast.
we are so cult that most people don't even know we exist. That's how cool our cult is. But I
So
think
cult.
if you go back to almost the definition of cult,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I'm going to try to um, define this genre of movies, but if you look at a cult is never really mainstream, right? Even if you look
Mm-hmm.
at religions, just where the terms often use, a cult is not like, hey, I'm a Baptist or I'm a Catholic, or I'm part of this, satanic, cult that is all, we're right next door to the Catholic Church. It's something definitely on the fringes, and
Yeah.
it seems to be pushing the extremes in some way. whether it's, sex or violence. But it's definitely not something the big studios, like I think Warner Brothers and them would be like, hey, John, we have a new movie about these toxic midgets that live in New York City, and it's going to star no famous actors. It's going to have the soundtrack is going to be a guy just hitting spoons against someone's butt, and we want to get a huge budget on this. It just
Yep.
doesn't sound that way. The definitions that I read, as we were going through this about what
Mm,
is a cult movie, they typically say these are movies that are start off off the mainstream. As you said,
mm,
there's low budget. And what I found interesting, it's driven heavily by the director. Like it's a vision. Like this guy's like, I have this vision. There's no real studio involvement, kind of like pressure, to
yeah.
hit like a top 10. It'd be like someone
Yeah.
making a song and like, I don't care if anyone listens to it. And he's
Right.
got the money to record it. To me, it was similar to that. And then I think people, we'll talk about why they love cult movies, but just in terms of what it is, that's what it seemed to me. And
Yeah.
we're going to go through some examples, but some of them that I disagree with, and I'd love to get your opinion. They say these are movies that are heavily quoted, that have conventions. These are movies that, have a diehard fan base. But I'd say if you look at like Jaws, like, man, I'm a huge fan, and there's so many people that can just rip off lines, from start to finish. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that type of like definition bucket of a cult movie.
No, I think what you described. I think what you described earlier was really spot on. I don't agree with that either. I think there's also this strange paradox between a cult film and an indie film, right? An independent film, because a lot of cult films probably are technically independent films. They're not made with a major studio. They have no major backing, and we'll talk about some examples of that. So I think there's a lot of cult films that start out as independent films,
Yeah.
and I agree with you. I think that there are. I think a lot of really good cult films don't have conventions. That don't have,
Mhm.
I think they do have a solid fan base. People, either tend to like them or hate them. I
Yeah.
think with cult films, either you're full on, or you're kind of like, oh, dude, that movie is wrong on every single level. And
Yeah.
there's a lot like that, right? It's like music. It's not everyone's taste. So
Yeah. Well, I think it's that extreme. And that's why I said a lot of these cult movies are based on this uncompromising vision.
mm,
So
yeah,
this director, um, or like in anything, you may have a balance of a team going like, hey, John, you can't throw these people doing this, or that's too much blood. It's like, no, man, this is how I see it, and
yeah,
this is how we're going to film it. And
right,
maybe some of those, it tends to be imbalanced, or it's skewed heavily in one of those, you know sex or gore, where anything that gets that shock factor. But
yeah,
that's how I always thought a cult movie, and it was something that your mom or dad doesn't know about, when you were growing up. It wasn't accepted, it wasn't big. It was like, hey, have you heard of this? And I think that's what made it so interesting, is that it wasn't mainstream, from the music, from the actors.
right.
And there are some, I think, that crossover, as you said, they start off independent,
Mhm.
but then they're just really good, and then they make it to the mainstream. And that's what I would ask you, John. So let's take a movie like one of your favorites. You mentioned Dazed and Confused a couple
Yeah,
episodes ago.
yeah,
It kind of
yeah.
checks
That's
off
what.
those boxes. Um,
Yeah, it's one of those movies that it didn't have like low production value. It certainly
mhm.
did. It was well made. It was a well made film. There's another example I can use later on, but for Dazed and Confused is one of those movies that I remember when it first came out. I saw it in the theater, and it had a cast of very well known actors now that weren't well known then.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was started out very small distribution. It was an independent film. I remember I was in New York when it came out, living in the West Village, and it played just down the street from me in the West Village. It's a little itty bitty theater,
Yeah.
and went to see it and just fell in love with the movie. And it was like hearing like a band for the first time that was on an independent label that you never heard of, but was amazing. And I went to this film, like, God, this movie's hilarious. It's so good. But, you know, it wasn't in any of the major theaters. It was really small. And then slowly but surely, it kind of gained momentum.
Yeah.
And then, you know, fast forward, and now it's a staple in a lot of people's, you know, favorite films.
Yeah.
From the early 2000s.
Well, but what do you think about its status now? Would you classify it as a cult movie?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I honestly, I don't think it's a cult film anymore. I think it's just I think it's gone bigger than that. I think it started out kind of an indie, and maybe it kind of went through a cult phase, and then something happened where the switch just turned. It's kind of like, you know, when something goes viral. I think at some point it went viral and it got really popular, and that was it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the idea of a cult movie being just unknown is not really the best definition, because there's so many that start off independent, just like bands or anything, any product, where it's, you know, unless you have massive budget, unless you're backed by the big studios, you can almost say any movie has a potential to be a cult movie. And from that definition that it's, you know, low budget or there's no big actors. But I really think it's that, though, almost like the extreme, because when I saw Dazed and Confused, it could have been backed by a large studio. You know, there wasn't anything about it that was like, man, this is really bizarre. Like, this is not gonna go.
Right.
And you and I were in the alcohol business, and we've seen many products where you're like, man, that is just never gonna be mainstream. Like, I don't care who's backing it. You know, and it can almost say they're cult products. And that's the way I kind of see it. It's like it's so extreme that you're like, man, this you're like, good luck, you know.
It's true. One of my, you know, favorite, I think probably an example of what I would consider a cult film. I still do today. You know, many people would argue this, but I don't care. This is just me talking.
Yeah. Hey,
and so my one of my favorite cult films is Clerks. You know, it was a film that was made in black and white in 1994. It was made for $27,000. And it was shot over a weekend. Kevin Smith, who basically wrote it, produced, directed it, maxed out his credit card, sold his comic book collection, and made a movie, right? And it's super gritty. It's black and white. It's got, the sound is crappy. It's got no big actors, but it's so, it's so good. And I remember when it came out, it was like I was in Chicago. It was playing in some little itty bitty pissant theater. And I mean, it was like this, it was just, again, it kind of like got this wave of fandom, like a band. And it was typically, it was mostly young people, right? You know, Gen Xers at the time that were all going to see this film. And to me today, it never quite, I think Kevin Smith got a lot of popularity from it and went on to make bigger budget films. But to me, that film still remains kind of a cult film, because a lot of people either totally get it, or they're like, that movie's the stupidest thing I've ever seen. It's like a student film, and they just don't get it, which they're stupid. But it's just, it still, to me, is a bit of a cult film.
Now, what do you think, John, about, okay, so let me just say, based on the research here, the studios have seen the success of these cult movies that have a diehard audience. There's no, I saw the cult movie, they repeat it, you know. The all-time classic was the Rocky Horror Picture Short, you know, as the gold standard of a cult movie. And it, for me, it was, you know, getting into film and just being a lover of kind of movies, it was like a rite of passage. And because you heard about it growing up, and maybe I was too young to go on my own, where they acted out, and but it's like, so they see the profit behind it, you know, it's a movie business, it's a show business. And so there are movies like Sharknado that, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but they're almost trying, I
know of it.
Yeah, they're trying to replicate. So it's like they see a formula, they see these aspects of the cult movie, and they try to almost like, hey, let's make a vintage shirt, let's
Right.
like let's make it look like it's really old but it's really new, and you know, so they're
Right.
doing that, and I think that's like where some people have said, and they've claimed that it's the death of the cult movie. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't know
Right.
what your thoughts about, you know, that type of genre, like fake cult movies.
Yeah, it's kind of like that kid that colors his hair blue and puts on, and tries to be punk, but he just, on the weekends, like he's in his eyes out again. I think there's like posers, right? If you want to call it that, like this, that they, it's like any kind of consumer product. As soon as
Yeah,
something becomes popular, there's knockoffs, and people want to ride the wave to kind of follow it.
yeah.
So I agree with you, Scott, on that. I think that the movie industry is here to make money, and if they see a formula that's working or see a look and feel that's working, yeah, they'll
Mhm.
give it a shot, and they'll try to do something kind of artificial to, like, it looks independent, it looks all gritty, but really it's backed by a major studio. And typically, the product isn't as good, right? I mean, from what I've seen before with films like that, they tend to not be as great. If you go back to like the real cult, like Ed Wood,
Yeah.
those kind of directors, Russ Meyer, kind of the godfathers of really cult film. Those were all like, just, you couldn't replicate those films. So I agree with you. I think there is that sort of belief that these studios can see an indie film that becomes a cult film and try to replicate that formula, but with a bigger budget. And it typically doesn't really work out.
I totally agree. I think it's hard to fabricate, or just by
Yeah,
nature of fabrication, you're not really authentic. It's like someone who's
sure.
trying to be funny. It's not as funny as the dude who has no idea and no self-awareness, right? So when he does something, it's truly funny. And I think people
Yeah.
are, some of these films are wildly successful, but I would label them maybe quirky or
Hmm.
uh daring type plots, but nothing of a cult movie. I really truly see that cult movie as something like your mainstream, right? Your middle of the road audience will look at it, and some will get it, like as you said with Clerks, and some will be like, no man, like that. Again, those extremes, the fringes just will alienate people.
That
And
100%.
I think so.
A
As
hundred
I
percent.
think if we go back to our favorite movie, The Centipede, you could say
Oh,
that
dude.
is that is like your
That's just an awful movie. That's
that
just like
that
not even a cult movie. That's
no,
just a
I would
bad
say,
movie.
I'm going to venture to say that's a cult of the cult movies. If you're a lover of cult movies, that's one of those, the next level. Um,
That's yeah, that's one. But I think in cult movies, one of my favorites, actually saw with my father in the
yeah,
theater, was Repo Man.
yeah,
The original Repo Man with Harry Dean Stanton, who's my favorite, was one of my
mhm,
favorite actors, and Emilio Estevez. Um, that movie was, in my opinion, was like it was a really great indie film.
yeah,
I don't know if I could call it a cult film because I don't know what kind of following it actually has, but it's one of those
yeah,
films that people would probably just throw into a bucket of being a cult film.
yeah.
Oh, because it's kind of like one of those you kind of like a lot, or you're like, I don't understand this movie at all. It's like the stupidest thing I've ever seen. So people say, well, it's a cult film, and they put it in that bucket, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I look at films, like some of those films, even like The Centipede Man. I mean, it's so bad, but people would say, well, it's so bad. I guess it's like a cult film because either you get it or you don't, or you
Yeah.
like it or you're just like appalled by it. And the same can be said about a lot of movies like that.
Yeah. I think there are some that I do see the why these critics, or you know film buffs, or who not, would say that, oh, if it has this um conventions, or people are able to like Monty
Mm,
Python, Holy Grail, you meet people and they can just recite the lines. But there's a lot of people that can do that on mainstream movies. Obviously
of
with
course.
Holy Grail and these, they start off almost as student independent films, and it gets a core base that's outside the mainstream. But the thing is, like on Netflix right now, like to me, if you're on Netflix, I can't say you're a cult movie just because of the definition of like cult. Like a cult is, again, if going back to the basics, it means it's kind of the outside. Like You got to search for it instead of it coming to you. But I think it's,
I would agree.
but
I would agree with that.
I think it's all blurry. I think that's why people are saying there's no more cult movies, or it's just independent movies. But let me say one that I still think is a cult movie.
Mm.
1974 Zardoz with Sean Connery.
Oh yeah. That's definitely a cult movie.
Okay,
without a doubt.
So let me tell you this. This is Sean Connery, right? The original James Bond. I mean, the James Bond for many 007 purists, right? The only James Bond. He's in a red nappy, right? What do they say in the UK? Like a diaper. And it's this science fiction. And it is so bizarre. You don't know who's on acid. Is it Sean Connery decided to take a couple doses, or the director, or the studio head? Who knows? But I remember seeing it because someone told me about it. I think it was our good friend Bob. And we were talking about, I think movies are random movies. I think that was the term. Yeah. And he says, oh, dude, Zardoz. And it's one of those that if you're on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, it's not like, okay, what's top picks of the week, because it was not a bomb, but it just is so bizarre, and it's still bizarre. And I kind of see that. But when I go on there and there's like a fan page groups, these people, I mean, it's not normal. These are people that may be in cults.
Like actual cults.
I know, dude, it's a gateway drug. You watch Zardoz, next thing you know, you're wearing a hood and your name's Dargon. And so that's when I look at these movies that most people would say, hey man, have you seen Zardoz? Or like, what is that? Who's in it? But ironically enough, you have a massive a global actor in there is Sean Connery. So that was a bit, and I think that's it. It kind of like, it's hard to find pure cult movies that obey by every definition. But I think it's to me, it's so much fun to enjoy movies that no one else like cares or knows about.
It's true, especially those that kind of start out, when I think about movies that started out just with like no following or with little fanfare, that are quirky, right? That are unusual and different, that tend to, I mean, Clerks was one of those kinds of movies. The Warriors, right, which was one of my all-time favorite films from 1979. I can't consider it a cult movie. I think it's got its own life of its own, although they do have like Warriors conventions. They now, like they do. Okay, they for real do. I've always wanted to get the vest.
I was gonna say, are you gonna go with the leather? Like I always say, I'm gonna try to be the dude with the headband.
Leather vest, no shirt underneath.
No, dude. Yeah. I will go as the baseball guy. That's gonna be
baseball fury. You would have to go as a baseball fury. Absolutely. But that's kind of one of those films that started out, in 79. It didn't do very well at the box office, but over time, there's films, even like modern day films that started off like Office Space, right? Yeah. Just, it didn't went out in the market. I think it may have gone like direct to video with Jennifer Aniston. I forgot who else was in it, but if you talk to anybody, a lot of people now say, "Oh yeah, Office Space," and then all of a sudden you see it on cable. It's like it's on TV like all the time now. There are these. I wouldn't consider them cult either, but they're just like these kind of fun, quirky movies that somehow slip through the cracks. Either they go one direction and get really popular, or they stay behind and become like these outliers, like like the Repo Man, like Zargon, and all those movies that never really caught on to mainstream, but have like this group of freaks that follow them around that will always love them, versus like the ones that start out small and kind of freaky, but then kind of get popularity and go forward. So, and with today, with the way you can watch entertainment, you don't have to find like the strange, sketchy theater like in the Village to go see a movie. Now you can you can go on the internet and someone's got it somewhere. You can download it and watch it.
Yeah, I think there was that tradition in the past, the midnight movie.
Yeah.
This late night where they're showing all the weird stuff, you would say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I always find that those fringes personally very fascinating. And sometimes I think it's really not that good, but I like it for what it is. Like I love it that it challenges just the mainstream. It kind of forces it to change, and they may not be
Sure.
I'd say, I mean, like monetically really good, like on its own, but it's
Mhm.
like, oh, they inspired this big director to do something
Yeah.
really cool, just like bands.
Absolutely. Well,
And
I think too those films are usually really good, Scott, because typically, like Clerks, I mean, basically Kevin Smith was the producer, the director, the
yeah,
writer. I mean, like those films usually are pure because there's no big studio or
yeah,
producer over them, kind of trying to change their vision. These
exactly.
these films are usually done on just small budget, that the person who's like funding it is usually the one that's acting in it, that
Yeah,
they're writing it, they're directing it, they're working the camera. I mean, and that's what those like independent small budget films become cult films, because they have that pure vision
yeah.
of the filmmaker that
Oh,
makes it
that,
so real that you can't really replicate that. It's like being it's like a big company like P&G trying to do a
yeah.
startup. It's like, no, dude, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and you saw really successful executions of that, like with Pulp Fiction, right? Quentin Tarantino,
Yeah,
who wrote
yeah,
it, small budget, and really,
yeah,
I always like a singular vision that's uncompromising. Because, I mean,
yeah.
the big studios, they're big, they have shareholders, they have to find movies that are going to appeal to a wide base, and you can kind of see it. It's like as you said, a pop song where it's good, but it's, I won't say watered down, but
Mm,
you can see the strategy behind it. Hey, the storyline shouldn't be this way, but if we write it this way, more people will like it, and people
right.
will give us a little bit of permission on it. And so it's kind of like, yeah, it's many of those Hollywood movies, yeah, it was good, you forget about it, it makes zillion of dollars and whatnot. But that's what I was found interesting about the cult movie. Now, why do people go crazy over them though? I mean, like
Mm,
Rocky Horror Picture Show, the show, in 1975, like absolutely massive in terms of its cult movie status. But what is it?
yeah.
Why do you think people, like these movies so much that, it's almost a cult?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think with Rocky Horror Picture Show, that's like an interactive experience too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like a very visceral like experience. When you go, like you're throwing things to screen, people shout
Yeah.
out the words. It is kind of like you said, a rite of passage for most people. Go see Rocky Horror Picture Show at midnight in some theater, and someone usually takes you there who's been there before, who like shows you how to do everything, because it's like there's a process to it. But I think, to answer your question, Scott, I think there's these films that start out, these very independent films that become cult. The reason why they become a cult, because they have this group of people or this small fandom
Mm-hmm.
base that sees the same vision that
Mm-hmm.
the filmmaker had for the movie. And there's something in it, whether it's the script or the look or the actors, that appeals. Like Clerks to me was I love that movie. I can watch it over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again, because there's something about it that puts me back in that period of time when I was that age, when I had friends like that, when we used to, I could have been in that movie. I would have fit right in, and there's something about that resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
Repo Man had music that was amazing soundtrack of like punk music, Circle Jerks, all these great bands were in it. There's something I think about all those films that these people who have some of the same things in common resonate to, maybe. And
Yeah.
that's what it is. And that's why they become like, Jaws fanatics, or,
Yeah.
a fanatic about this movie or that movie or Rocky Horror Picture Show, because there's something about it that's special that they're not
Yeah.
seeing or hearing in other films, that they just get into. And there's something about, it's kind of like a club, right? Like you're
Yeah.
part of this club that loves this movie. Like you're like Jaws, you can go on the fan page for Jaws and geek out. I
Yeah.
think that's why people love those cult films.
Yeah, I think there's something, if I had to describe, if someone has never heard of cult movies or any
Mm,
interest in it, I would say that it's honesty. Like there is,
mm,
like we talked about, the singular vision. I think that uncompromising honesty where it's just, how do I say it? You don't have the, I won't say the business coming in and diluting it, but it is pure. And I think that people can, like someone who makes something from the good of their heart, and there's no, you know, there's no ulterior motive behind it. It's like, hey, here's my vision. I want you to see it. And sometimes it's a complete bomb. You know, you have these best of the worst movies that are very similar. It's a singular guy, singular vision, and he just totally strikes out. But he strikes out and he gives it everything he has. And I think if I had to hypothesize why people love these and why they can't stop talking about it, they go to conventions, they'll wear the thing, is there something true behind it? That may sound a little
100%. No, I think you're right. I think that people, consumers, if you will, these movies see the honesty and the passion that the filmmaker had to make the movie, and it comes through on the screen. And then whether it's shit or not, but usually there's something there. Right. It's usually not all shit. Usually there's something there that people really like. And then you find, and then you do like the background, work, and you find out who the person was and why they did it. And then it just becomes even more real, because you're right. It's honest, it's pure, and there's nothing that's watering it down. There's no one that's, trying to tell them something different. They're just doing it their way.
It is, so many of these movies today, they're products, and the studios are, as you referenced Procter and Gamble, they're exactly that. They make movies for people that go to movies, and hence there's tons of consumer testing, just like you and I in our former life. A product isn't just this like irrational thing. Hey, everything is calculated. So when you have a guy who does absolutely no research, and the actors, you'll get some of these movies and these are guys that are just like, they're friends. Hey man, I'm making a movie. Dudes have no experience, but just like anything where something's not trained, it's like, it's almost just from the heart. And it's hard to hate that when you see someone who is just doing something out of the good of their heart, even if it's good or bad. And I think that honesty or that intention, people can see it. Had to wrap that up.
There's a really good documentary. I'll say to whoever's watching. There's a movie. there's a movie called American Movie, and it's a documentary about this gentleman named Mark Borchardt. And I can't remember the year it came out. I can't IMDb fast enough. The year it came out, I believe, in the late 90s. And it's about this filmmaker named Mark Borchardt, who is trying to make a film, and is both hilarious, a little bit sad, but with a lot of really great, really good story behind why he's doing it. And it's just what you said. It's this goofy guy from Milwaukee who's trying to make a movie, and he has nothing but love and passion for making film, like you would be if you were a metal guitarist. Like, it's what you live and breathe. American Movie is about him making a cult movie, and it is fantastic. If you watch it, you will love it. I guarantee it. And it's real. It's not a mockumentary. It's real. So it makes it even better. It makes it even better.
No, and that's it. And I think later episodes that we're going to talk about are, the best of the worst, these movies that totally bomb. And I think you'll see a lot of parallels between those movies and these kind of true cult movies. But again, I want to say to everyone, thank you so much. We've been gone a couple weeks, a lot of travel, summertime, but again, thanks for hanging with us. And we're going to post some of these movies, clips from that, on our Instagram. And again, if you like us, tell your friends, subscribe. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, and all the social platforms. And we really appreciate it. And
we do.
And we'll find ways to kind of beat the big bad algorithm. And in the meantime, everyone, have a fantastic weekend. John, I know it's raining out there, so you're losing your tan as we speak.
No, I know. I have to get back and get my Mr. Hawaiian Tropic going again, because I'm losing a little bit of rays.
You'll get there. Well, everyone, listen. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.